Just remember, I had started recording. Good that we have the one from the first meeting. Uh, I want to acknowledge that some of you mentioned, and you were right. The data that we were providing to you was not ideal. Was not that meaningful for some of you just because of the way your program works. And I believe the institution is moving towards being able to provide more meaningful data, but we are, just in the midst of that. And it doesn't help us a lot also the fact that the database that we have was not really developed for non-credit. So that's just some of these struggles that we need to keep working to overcome. But anyway, that was just for section number 2 where you did this longitudinal analysis. Then we jumped to section number 2B, which was about the student engagement and characteristics, and that was a couple of questions about your practices in the classroom. And I really appreciated how you were able to really make a distinction between what you consider ideal practices and what you are actually able to do, because we all know that we would love to do A, we would love to do B, we would love to do Z, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're able to do that in a classroom. So we really appreciate that you were very honest with that. After that, we moved to section number 3, which was about the course material. And I believe that was a very interesting debate about how, what's the best way to make our syllabus more meaningful. And for this section, you analyze your syllabus in different ways. You looked at the syllabus first impression, at the message, at the language, at the tone, and then you came up with very important ideas about what were some of the challenges that you had to make your syllabi better or your syllabus better. And finally, the last section that you have worked on is section number 4, which was about classroom policies and assessments. And this was just pretty much, again, explain how you apply different classroom policies, such as the attendance policy. And you also, hold on, there you go. Okay, and yeah, the last thing that you did was the classroom policies and assessments. You also look at the data. Molly and Cassandra share with you some data in so that you can look if the way you had organized your assessment was impacting the students or the number of dropouts that you have for a particular class. And I want to say that is not necessarily the case. Many of you found that that was not really happening. Like your students would not show like a particular trend in how they are dropping off. So there's just all of that, and this is just a recap. But the one thing that I wanted to ask all of you is, were there, like, what was the section that you enjoyed the most? I think that was my first question for you. I'm still unsure who's Cyprian's iPhone. Is that one of the okay, I have Matthew here. He enjoyed the meeting in person near the bay. Okay, that was a great discussion. Okay, thank you, Matthew. Anyone else who wants to share what was the section that they enjoyed the most, of the piece of this project that they have enjoyed the most? Okay, all the data in part number 2. That's good.
This is Chinazam. I'm actually struggling with number 4 because the number 4 is asking us to put number of students, but the data I got was for the number of hours students attended.
Got it. So I'm gonna talk after this. I'm gonna show to you, there will be some openings for one-on-one support meetings. What I would encourage you to do, Chinesom, would be to register yourself in one of these support meetings, because yes, the data that we share with you was what we call the ACS, average class size, because we are not able to pull the number of students from the system. But there's a workaround. Like, we just need to do the analysis in a slightly different way. But we can totally talk a little more about that after the session, and I would also encourage you to register to one of these support meetings. But I'll talk more about that later.
How's it going? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
I also have here, Aaron, you mentioned that probably part two and the live meeting at the Sheraton. And as you remember, there will be another meeting or another professional development learning event on September 25th, but this is going to be virtual. So just stay tuned for more information on that. Now, if I were to ask you, what was the section that you enjoyed the least? What could you tell me?
Section 4. Section 4 is my worst one.
You mind if I take a quick
Oh,
look?
section 4, yeah, for you, Chinasum? Okay.
Hey, just a quick reminder, everybody, if you're not talking, if you could just mute, we're getting a little bit of background noise. Thanks.
I'll touch it. I just want to make sure it looks okay.
Anyone else wants to share? I'm trying to find like what was the least enjoyable piece of the, you know, of all this project, just so that we can continue improving in the future. Okay, I have enjoyed looking at all the data from section 2, and all the data was great. Section 4 was very useful. All right, thank you for sharing, everyone. Okay, I am going to jump to the next slide, and the next slide is meant to show you what's going to happen next. And what's going to happen next is a set of different activities. So the first one, obviously, right now is we're having this.
Hey, sis, just hold on one second. Hey, Chinazam,
Yes.
can you mute your phone, please?
I thought I did. Okay, let me do it.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jesus.
Yeah. So we are having this meeting today, but then after this meeting, we will be offering one-on-one optional meetings. So these meetings are 30-minute optional meetings. In case you're still having challenges to complete your online form, you can go ahead and register yourself for one of these meetings. And just give me one sec, because I want to share with you the link before I forget. So these meetings will work like the same way we put them the last time. So just go ahead and put your number if you're interested in participating in one of these optional meetings. There is no specific topic for this meeting. So Chinasum, for example, for you, you could put your name in one of these time slots. If you want to talk a little more about what you just mentioned, we could do that. And everyone in general, just feel free to select either any of these slots. In these meetings, Cassandra and I will be working together to support you. So these questions could be either related to the data, or maybe to the syllabi, maybe to any other thing that is that relates to the Faculty Institute. Feel free to register. After these meetings happen, you will need to complete the section number 5 and submit your online form by July 31st. So that is the due date that the region provided, and that's when you will need to complete your work. At this point, you just need to complete section 5, and we'll show you how, you know, what that section is about. It's more about like questions, answering different questions. Then after that happens, we are gonna have one-on-one meetings with you to provide feedback about your action plan. So in this case, Cassandra, myself, and other people in the planning team from the Faculty Institute will look at your action plans, and then we will get back to you with some feedback. We will allow you to go back to your online form and apply those changes or any of the recommendations that we provide to you. And that would be pretty much it. And then, as I mentioned, we will have the second in-person learning event in September 25th. So I want to give you a minute to look at this slide and also ask me any questions before we move to the next one. So just let me know, do you have any questions about any of these activities?
Where is the link at to get to the schedule for the meetings? I didn't see it in the Canvas.
Oh, yes, you
To
could
get to the Google form.
Yeah, I just put it on the chat, but you could also find it on the Canvas. I think it's on the useful information section. But if not, you can just go to the chat. I just put it in there.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other question, everyone, before we jump to the next slide?
I wonder if you can send it through the email, please. I'm not at the place where I can look at the Canvas and look at the all the information you're showing. Can you put in an email?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'll send you one email with that information, Chinasan.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right. So it seems like we don't have any questions. Oh, I'm happy to hear that the Canvas shell was helpful. Yeah, Leah Tsao, she's our project assistant. She has been working very hard to try to find ways to make the Canvas shell more engaging. So all the feedback that you have been providing has been very useful. And I also wanted to have a conversation, but maybe I'll try to have that conversation on a one-on-one basis in the future, because we really want to understand how can we use the Canvas shells in the future, like for future projects like this one, like the data coaching sessions. I believe we, and when I say we, I mean the research office, we need to understand better how faculty would like to connect or would like to use the Canvas shell, because I am not entirely sure if you would be interested in using a Canvas shell in the same way that one student would use it. So I think the research office, we need to learn a little more about that, because at sometimes we were not sure if the way in which we were organizing the modules and the information was the best way to do it for you as faculty members. So I'll be probably connecting with some of you in a one-on-one basis to learn a little more about that. But in general, I really appreciate all the advice that you provided. Again, we were learning how to do that, and Leah, she spent quite some time really trying to put
I guess,
for you.
I guess my challenge is moving from remote, from on-site to remote classes, and it seems like most of my data and the analysis will be meaningless because I'm not gonna use it anymore. It's not what I'm doing right now. So I guess the I mean, it's wonderful to do the studies, but at the same time, the application is a little different from how the class offering and everything else we're doing right now. So it's still a big struggle for me. And then,
Got it. Because yeah, and I think you've mentioned this before, Chinasum. It could have, like, just like what with Chinasum, she previously mentioned that the classes that she received, like the data from the classes she received, she's not using those classes anymore. I mean, she's not teaching those classes anymore. So for her, she mentioned it was challenging to really try to do something with that, and I totally I get that. So I would say in the support meetings we are gonna have to talk about that, Chinasum, so that we can determine what's the best way to move from there. And another thing that we will also be speaking about later today is, yes, what happened if I am a little afraid that this current environment is not gonna really allow me to try anything, because right now there's a lot of uncertainty. So we're gonna have a discussion about that. So I'm gonna jump to the next one.
thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So I have the one-on-one support meetings. I think I already explained this. So we have, before the submission, there's the opportunity to have these meetings. They will be happening these days. Just use the link that I provided to you, and you can see the specific times. And these are optional. Again, if you feel like you have everything under control, most of you, I have seen your online forms and they're looking pretty good. So if you feel like I'm okay, you don't need to attend these meetings. But then we will have meetings after you submit your online form. And the purpose of these meetings are to provide feedback to you regarding your action plan. So these meetings, we would require you to be there, because this is part of the overall project. We haven't determined what will be the date for this meeting, but just stay tuned and we'll provide you more information on this. But they need to happen soon. Now, I am going to jump to the action plan. And just like with the action plan, that's section number 5 in your online form. And just like with all the other sections, the region built this section in a way that is kind of like just asking you different questions. And there are no right or wrong answers. It's just you trying to organize your thoughts up around some ideas. So what I'll do in here is I'm going to show you the different questions that you're going to find in your online form. And I will show to you some examples that I put together. And again, the examples that I put together are not meant to be entirely true or entirely accurate. It's just so that I can make my point about how you would be able to put something together. So the first thing that I have is the first section that the first question that you're gonna find in this section. It says, something about what you learned. So, okay, from what you learned, is there something that you want to address? So that is the first question. So it doesn't have to be anything complicated. This is one example that I put together. So in this example, I'm just telling people that from my data, from all the discussion, I learned that my 40 years and older students, they have lower retention than the other students. So I want to improve their retention levels. You can see this is not complex. This is nothing like out of this world. It's just like a statement that I'm saying. This is what I want to change. And you might wonder, okay, Jesus, so you are saying that you want to increase the retention for this population from 50 to 65%. How did you get to the 65%? Why not 80 or why not 90? Usually what we do in research is that we try to emulate the same level that other groups are showing, or the average. So that's what we usually try to do. So for example, in this case, I might have selected 65 because that is the average that I'm getting, or maybe that is the percentage, or that is the retention rate that my group from above, the one that is having better results, is showing. So it's just a point of advice. There's nothing like a rule. If you feel like you want to do an 80%, 90%, that's up to you. Just keep in mind that sometimes when you set the bar too high, that in the long term makes you get disappointed because you're not getting there. So it's just a matter of how you want to see it. So there's this is the first example, and this is the second example that I put together. And for this example, I'm saying that my retention rates, they tend to be lower in fall compared to spring. So I was looking at my data and I compared the results that I had in fall versus the results that I have in spring. And it seems like my retention goes down in fall. So I would like to increase the retention rates of my fall course from 40% to 60%. Again, where did you get that 60% from? Well, because probably that was the one that spring was showing. So before we move forward, I want to ask you, does anyone has any questions or any comments about the examples? As you can see, they're very basic. There's nothing out of this world. So I would like to hear your opinion or any thoughts that you might have. It seems like we're good. I'm going to jump to the next one. So I started with the first question. I said what I am trying to do with my action plan. And then the next question that you're gonna find in your online form is, all right, so what is your intervention? What are you planning on doing? Okay, and I'm gonna start telling them. Well, based on my experience as faculty, my discussions with other faculty members and resources that I reviewed, so I found something. And then after that, I started like analyzing, thinking, okay, why is this happening? And maybe I asked around, and maybe I look at a couple of books or articles or things that we had in the web. So I look into different things, right? So this is my example for 40 years and older students. So I did that. And I found that 40 years and older students, they tend to have a more clear expectation regarding what they want to get from a CTE program. And this is usually a job. So what I'm trying to say here is that compared to my younger students, my older students, they know why they are in the classroom. They want to get a job. So that is going to have some implications. And these are the implications that I identify. So what I just said makes me think that these students, these kind of students, or this group of students, are more likely than my other students, the young ones, to feel frustrated and drop the class if they cannot connect what they are learning with a potential job outside of the program. So pretty much what I'm saying here is that my students, my 40 plus years students, if they don't see clearly how they are going to use something in their jobs outside of the classroom, they'll feel frustrated and they will end up dropping the class. So you know how sometimes the lesson, it's a little bit hard to connect a particular lesson to something that you're going to be doing outside. And they may feel frustrated, like, oh my God, am I wasting my time in here because I cannot see how this would help me. So that's just kind of like the explanation that I built together, and that depends on you. I really cannot tell you how this would be developed for each of your statements. It's more about what you have learned in this time, what your expertise tells you, what other faculty have told you, what are the resources that you have identified. This example, for example, I took it from some articles that I found that saying that this happens, but not necessarily with non-credit. It happens when you have four-year college students and you compare the younger students versus the older students. So yeah, I think it might not be applicable entirely to non-credit, but it's just so that we can have an example.
Hey, Seuss, I think it's very much in line with just general adult learning principles and how they learn just in terms of their expectations for a course versus somebody who is younger and just doesn't have the experience that they have. It is in research and literature, so I think it would apply.
Got it, okay. Does anyone has any comments, any thoughts about the example? I'm gonna jump to the next one then. So remember, the question was, okay, what is the intervention that you will apply? So I put this as my background, like this is where I am coming from, but now this is my intervention or my interventions. So in this case, I'm gonna do three things. One thing that I'll do before the class starts. I'm gonna include a description in the syllabi regarding how this course can lead to a job certification, and I will also, inside of the syllabi, I will relate the course's allows to job skills in a way that when students look at the syllabi, for them, it is clear how this is gonna help them to find a job, but I'll be careful to not say in the syllabi, hey, this is gonna give you a job or this is gonna give you this job, but you know, I'm gonna try to find that balance. So that is something that I'll do before the class starts. Then, during the first day of classes, I'm gonna ask all my students what are their after completion plans for their programs, like what you wanna do when you complete your program. And I'm gonna use that opportunity to convey how important for me is to help every student to succeed in their goal, especially to the ones that are interested in getting a job. So I'm gonna use that opportunity to tell 40 years and more and older students, I'm gonna use that opportunity to tell them, I get you. I get that you wanna get a job, so we'll try to help you out. And throughout the term, I'm gonna provide a 5-minute explanation about how skills align to a job requirement every time a new lesson starts. So especially for those lessons that you might think, I really don't know how am I gonna use this in the future or in a potential job, I'm gonna use some time, I'm gonna spend like 5 minutes showing people, hey, this is how you would use this outside. Because at least I remember when I was in my undergraduate program, I had that thought a lot. There were a lot of lessons where I was wondering, okay, how am I supposed to use this outside in a potential job? And now I might be using it every day. So sometimes it's just, you just need that push or having a little more clarity. So that is my intervention. It's nothing out of this world, as you can see. It has to be something that I can manage. It has to be mainly something that happens inside of the classroom, as you can see, because again, the main focus of this institute was for you to develop something that you can do within your classroom. I'm gonna jump to the other example. And the other example, as you might remember, it was about it was about having lower retention rates in the fall compared to spring. So again, based on my experience as a faculty, my discussions with other faculty members and resources that I reviewed, I found that students' retention outcomes tend to be lower in fall compared to spring due to the winter break. So there's some sort of thing going on in a way that the winter break has an impact in how many people come back to the school. And spring break doesn't have that level of impact. So I found that I have Karen Age. Cassandra, I'm having a hard time. Karen Hamilton. Okay, can you look into the waiting room, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. Anyway, so I found that sometimes, yeah, the winter break, it has an impact more than spring break has. And then I was thinking, okay, so now for the sake of my example, let's pretend that I have a class where many of my students, they tend to be, their country of origin, the country of origin of many of my students tends not to be the US. So say that I have a lot of students from Mexico. So during the winter break, they usually go back to Mexico. And something that I found is that when they go back to their country of origin, they face two challenges: the homesickness and also the expectation of isolation and lack of connection once they go back. So what this causes is that students are not thrilled about the idea of going back to school, because they go back to their country and they're like, oh my God, I feel so good here. You know, I feel like I'm connecting with people. So I'm gonna go back to school and I don't even have friends. So I'm not thrilled about that idea. So all of that is making me think, okay, what can I do about this? So for that, I developed an intervention, and I believe it has 3 pieces. So the first one is at the beginning of the term. I'm gonna identify whose country, or I'm gonna identify, and this brought up a discussion during the last session. I'm gonna ask my students if any of them have any plans to visit a different place during the winter break. I'm gonna use that to identify which of those students could potentially fall into this problem that I mentioned. And then throughout the term, I'm gonna make sure to host relationship building activities. Why? Because I have found that students who go back to their home countries, they get a little anxious about coming back because of the expectation of isolation and lack of connection, because they don't have friends. So I'm gonna try to build or host some relationship building activities in a way that they can make friends in the classroom and they feel excited about going back to see their friends. And then during the winter break, I'm gonna send personalized emails to students that are visiting their country of origin, just so that I can see how they are doing, and also tell them, hey, remember, we're waiting for you. We're looking forward to having you again in the classroom. So that's gonna be my intervention. And again, as you can see, it's nothing out of this world. It's nothing super complex. It's something that I feel like I can do within the classroom. So before jumping to the next question in the action plan section, I wanna hear your thoughts. Do you feel like this could somehow be used in any of your action plans? Do you feel like this doesn't make that much sense? I just wanna hear your thoughts.
I guess it's a good clarification for me, because I was wondering, it's like, hey, if we identified something outside of the data, so specifically outside of the steps, right? Which this is what it seems like. It's like, hey, I looked, building on what I learned from the sections, and then also the resources and also the discussions that stem from this, you can develop an action plan outside of really the specific steps that were in the sections, right? Obviously, because this is something that's outside of that.
I think you have to, essentially.
Okay, right.
Because we're looking at, I think the whole point of really, even though of course we want to come up with a hypothesis and test it and look at old data, it's kind of impossible to do right now in this environment. So the whole point is really to have faculty look at the data and try something.
Right.
And if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, we still learn something. And so I think really that's, the broader implication of this.
And the one thing that I think, I believe is important to mention is that, yes, the data might just give you one idea, and maybe the idea was completely different from what you originally saw in the data. That's perfectly fine. I believe the place where the region might be trying to be a little more careful is when it's about the kind of intervention that you would be developing to work with that, which, we try to make something that can be done within the classroom. I think that is the place where they have been trying to be a little more careful, but no, yeah, regarding what you have identified, I see that probably we have 3 kinds of scenarios in this room. I'm pretty sure that I have people that when they were looking at the data, they identified something, and then using the same data, they were able to, determine what was going on. So we have that group. And then we have another group, which is people who, with the data, some idea came to them like, okay, this might be going up, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to do da. And then we have a third group, which might feel like, you know what? Yeah, the data was great, but it didn't allow me to really look into anything because the data was not arranged, organized, or developed in a way that is meaningful to my program. So that's totally fine. It could happen. Any other thoughts that you want to share about the potential class interventions? Okay, I'm going to jump to the next one. After this question, the online form is going to ask you, what are the activities that you're planning to complete? So there's going to be some sort of table where you're just going to enter the activities and then you're going to enter the due dates. Now, I do want to point out that another option, and this is how my example works, if you feel like the current environment is really not going to allow you to do anything, there's always the option to wait a little longer to apply any class intervention. So in my example, I put that I was going to start with my intervention in in the spring 2021, just because right now I didn't feel like I was able to do anything. We're just dealing with so many things. There's just so many things happening at the same time, so it's a little hard. So I put here some of the things that I would do. Cassandra, I'm not sure if you were trying to tell us something. Yeah.
We lost you just on the last slide a little bit.
Oh, got it. But yeah, well, it's pretty much telling you that you have some wiggle room. You have some wiggle room with the due dates. There's nothing that is telling us, hey, you need to have everything done by this date, or you need to use this. Things need to happen in this month. No, there's nothing like that. So in this place, what I did is that I threw a couple of activities that I identified. So the first one that I included is discuss my intervention with my program chair and potentially my dean, just because I want to use that opportunity to receive feedback, because maybe the ideas that I previously mentioned to you are not really feasible. Maybe I can get in troubles and I'm not even aware of. Last time when I presented this to the group, some of our folks mentioned, okay, are you sure that you can ask a student about their country of origin in one survey, or are you sure that's how you want to start a class with them? So those are the kind of things that I would like to have my program chairs or dean's input, like trying to see if maybe I'm missing something important. So I would start with that. That's gonna give me a little more clarity if my idea makes sense to people outside that myself. Then I'm gonna start, because I mentioned that I was going to change something in the syllabi, so I'm gonna review and revise the syllabi. Then I'm gonna develop a course satisfaction survey, and I'll show you why I need that in the next slide. Then I'm gonna identify the existing materials to show students how each skill taught in my course will be useful in the work environment. Remember, the first intervention was about showing students why my lessons are gonna help them to get a job or to do better in their jobs. So I'm gonna spend a little time trying to connect the dots in there. Then I have first session with students and ask them about goals, so that I can tell people that are interested in getting a job, yes, I hear you, I'm gonna help you to get to that place. Then I'm gonna provide 5-minute blurbs every time that a new lesson starts. As I mentioned, I'm gonna tell them, we're gonna talk about this today, and this is how what I'm gonna show you is gonna be connected to a potential job. Then at the end of the term, at the end of the class, I'm gonna ask them to complete a course satisfaction survey. Now, course satisfaction survey, that could mean 1 million different things. That is a very broad thing. But my my survey is going to be specifically about identifying if students feel like I was able to connect the lessons to job skills and things like that. Then I have analyzed my survey results. Then I'm going to analyze the class roster, because at the end I want to make sure, I want to identify if I really was able to move the needle. Did I keep more students that want to, than the ones that I usually keep or not? And then I'm going to share my results with colleagues. I'm going to tell them, yes, this did work, this didn't work, this is what I'm going to do in the future, or this is what I'm going to stop doing, whatever you want to share. There is not a unique way to do this. You can make this as a specific, if you want to make this more specific, that's okay. If you feel like you don't need to be as detailed, that's also okay. As long as someone who is not yourself is able to follow what's going to happen. This is another example. This is the example that I built for the students that don't come back after the winter break. So again, I'm going to start asking my program chair about my idea. If they feel like it's a good class intervention, a potentially effective class intervention, I'm going to develop the survey. Actually, after the discussion we had last meeting, the last meeting with your other folks, I think we agreed that it might be better, as opposed to a survey, it might be better to just try to engage in an informal conversation. Because again, you don't know how students will feel if you lead the class, if the first thing that you get from your teacher is a survey asking, hey, are you from this country? So that depends. You know, I think that's part of the discussion that you would have with the program chair or other people from your program to determine what's the best thing to do. Then I have in here host first classroom relationship building activity. As I mentioned, I identified that my students do not get thrilled about coming back after the winter break because they don't have a lot of friends. So I'm gonna try to help them somehow to make that happen. And then I have in here Tammy. She's asking, how do we know it works if the whole way that we teach has changed? Yeah, and we'll talk about that in a couple of slides because that is a very important thing. But what I can tell you is the region is not really, I mean, the region is cognizant of that. So I'll talk a little more about that, but the region gets that. Then I have Robert here. He's asking maybe a course satisfaction survey at a halfway point in the class, so adjustments can be made with a present class. Yeah, that's very interesting. I think that's a very good idea. Then I have, I see Cassandra replying. So you can see this is another way to do this. So before I jump to the next slide, I'm wondering, does any one of you has additional comments, questions? It seems like we're good. So I'm gonna jump to the next one. So the metrics. The metrics is just about showing us how are you planning to determine if your intervention worked. So the question is, how will you measure the effectiveness of your intervention or action plan? What are the metrics that you plan to track, and how will you track those metrics? So in my example, this is for my first example, the one with students age 40 and plus. So pretty much what I'm going to do at the end of the class, I'm going to compare how many students started versus how many students completed. So that's going to be my metric. And I'm going to compare that number versus previous terms. Doesn't have to be complicated. Again, the region is very aware that right now the environment, it doesn't really allow to get very I don't know what's the word that I'm looking for. I'm gonna use picky, but I don't think that's the correct one. But yeah, they're aware that it might not be ideal to compare an online environment versus a non-online environment, or pre-COVID versus COVID after COVID. That's gonna be hard. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna compare the retention rates of the class where I apply the intervention versus classes from previous terms by looking at the class rosters. And I'm gonna look at all the demographics, but I'm gonna focus in the group that I previously identified. And this is the place where you would determine if you're gonna need support from the research office. If you're gonna need support from the research office to make any of this happen, you need to include that in the action plan so that we can provide you feedback about the feasibility of that.
So, Jesus, while you're bringing up your slides, there's been a couple comments in the chat about when the actual project is due. So I want to make sure people know that the project plan is due July 31st, and that project plan will outline when your actual project is due. Because like Jesus is saying, you might need help from the research office, or there might be other people involved. And so one project plan may be, you know, a semester, one project plan may be over the course of a year, or a couple different classes. So it's really going to be individualized. So there's no specific due date for the project itself, but the project plan is due July 31st. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, I just want to make sure I answered that question.
All right, and then we have a question from Aaron. What about the project itself?
Cassandra answered that. Yeah,
That's the question.
Oh, yeah. Okay, got it. All right, thank you. Okay, so the other metric that I would use for my first intervention is the satisfaction rate, what I mentioned before. I just getting Alex. So in this one is students who agree that the relation between course outcomes and potential job is clear, divided by the total students. That's just my metric. And it doesn't have to be complicated. It's just something that I can use to really determine if things worked or didn't work. So I'm gonna analyze the results of my survey to determine if students felt like the relation between the course's outcomes and potential job is clear. Now, if you include something about a survey in your action plan, we would need to have a discussion. I mean, the research office mainly with you to determine what's the best way to roll over this survey, and also talk a little about the potential bias that you have in this kind of surveys. Because what happens a lot is that sometimes the students, they develop a relationship with the faculty in a way that if you give them a survey at the end of the term, they might not be entirely honest or candid about how they feel about different things just because of that relation. But I'm pretty sure you are way more aware of this than myself. So it's just that that's part of the things that we would need to have a further conversation after we see your action plan. And that's why we are gonna need to have a meeting after you submit on July 31st. For the second, I included the retention rates for students that, and again, this is what came up from the discussion last time. Maybe I would need to readdress this. Instead of talking about students with country of origin different than United States, maybe I would need to talk about students who do winter traveling. But I think it depends what kind of information can you get. Some of you might know that, some of you might feel like you can get that information, some of you might feel like, no, that's not something I could get. So this is just one metric. I want to see how many of those students, how many of the students who go on a winter travel, how many of those do I get back? And I also want to assess how well my communication with them goes during winter. Say that I send email to 20 students that were traveling during winter. Okay, how many of those students really replied to me? Because maybe they don't like that way of communication. So even if I try to do that, I'm gonna find out that that doesn't really mean anything to them. So it's just part of the thing that we would find. So in general, before jumping into the next slide, I want you to understand that the metrics, they are not anything super complex. It's just something that will allow you to determine if your intervention worked or not. And the region is aware that in this current environment, maybe not make the most sense to compare pre-COVID versus COVID versus post-COVID. Yeah, we know that that's a hard thing to do right now. So that's why much of this after intervention discussion or analysis might have to be more of with a qualitative perspective or an anecdotal perspective. Not that they are the same, but trying to see, okay, maybe I don't have like the data in the way that I wanted to have, but what I saw is that this did work and this didn't work. So just keep that in mind. And before jumping to the next slide, I'm wondering if any of you has questions, comments?
I have a question. So I just had asked the question if it can be the same project that we work together with somebody else in the Institute. So based off of a lot of the things that I learned from this, that I did, like looking at my syllabus and having a letter of introduction and all of this stuff, as soon as I saw these things and reflected, I immediately like did something, right? So I changed my syllabus. I made it more like a FAQ style, like, you know, in a way that made sense, that it took out all the academia language, and it still has the main things that are supposed to be in it, but it's in a way that's more accessible to students. So I already did that. So I don't know if like that's my plan, and but I've already done it, and now like I'm not like I don't know how to track that because now I've already implemented it. I made like a intro website for my class that had pictures and what my Canvas like looks like inside, because I made this fun like online virtual sewing classroom that's got all these icons and things. So I've already like jumped on and did all these things. So I'm thinking, well, can I use that as my project? Or like I know as a department, we're going to be doing something to address this exact thing of we lose students after the break. So we're going to do, as a department, we're doing this whole like apply your skills fashion competition fashion show virtual thing, right? And so I'm going to be a part of that too, like with Shirley, who's in the Institute. So does this need to be something that's brand new that I haven't already done? Because as soon as the light bulb went on with all these things, I just started doing them because they made perfect sense to me and I wanted to get better.
Can I answer that question, Jesus?
Sure.
I think everything, like any one of the things that you just talked about, could be a project. So now we just have to figure out some trackability pieces. And so that would just be a one-on-one conversation with me and Jesus and looking maybe back at some classes. But any one of those things you could do. Now, it's not going to be perfect because we're looking back at classes that you taught online, or I'm sorry, in person, and now you're online. So we recognize that. But I think the point is like, what will it look like moving forward? And ultimately, if you're solving retention, you've solved retention, right?
Right.
It'd be great to be able to isolate those things, but we're not in a perfect environment.
Right.
Maybe this is a good opportunity, because it came up on the last call, just to talk a little bit about the case study I did with one of my faculty members. Or is this an okay time to talk about that, Jesus, or did you?
No, yeah, you can go for it. Yeah.
So on our last call, I had a faculty member that I worked with last year on a case study. It's the Odessa case study, and I put it up on the Canvas for you guys if any of you wants to read it. But essentially, Odessa is a community college in Texas, and they had really bad success rates. I mean, they were getting to the point where they were going to be defunded essentially. Their success rates were averaging under 57%, and their students were primarily minority students, socioeconomically disadvantaged students, and a working class student. Very similar, I would say, to what our students are. And so they got a new president. They certainly had a fire under them to try to figure things out because of the defunding. But what they looked at is that they found a pattern essentially in their data. They started really looking at data-driven decision-making, and they found that instructors who had low student drop rates had 4 activities that they all had in common essentially, right? So they interacted with the students by name from the first day of class. They monitored and addressed student behavior quickly, and it was appropriate to the situation. They met one-on-one with their students. And the 4th thing was they established clear expectations to the students, usually via a very clear syllabus. So they found that faculty members were doing 1 or 2 of these things, but they weren't doing all 4 together at the same time. So they instituted the drop rate improvement program. And so they had faculty members do these things, and they had a lot of other stuff going on. They also eventually, after this, changed their course schedule and some other things. But from this alone, they saw a huge improvement. Fast forward 5 years later, and about 40% of their faculty had no drops whatsoever in any of their classes. Their most underperforming student tended to be Hispanic male. And again, fast forward, 96% of them were completing classes. Like these great success stories. So last summer, me and a faculty member did this. And she was already doing a lot of these things. She was already a great faculty member, but we said, okay, we're going to try this. So we created a little chart for her, like a cheat sheet. We put all the students' names on them, and we basically, captured all of these things. And so, she met with each one of them, and it wasn't formal. It might've been on a break or something during the class, but she made sure to get to everybody. In her case, in her class, she did not name tags, but seating names, on the little cards. And again, she was already a great instructor. But when we looked at the data, and what she had said, initially was that, you know, I'm already doing a lot of this, but what I noticed was there's maybe a couple students that get away from me every semester that I'm not doing all of these things with. And by having the checklist, I was able to get to every single one of them. So we went back and looked at her data, and from one semester to the next, she had increased her retention rate by 7%. So it's kind of, you know, it doesn't have to be something huge. Like, it was something we tried, and again, she was already doing a great job, but it did make a difference in her class, surprisingly enough, something as simple as this. So anyway, we talked about it on the last call. A lot of people thought it was really interesting. I did put the article up on the Canvas shelf. Anyone else is interested in it? There's a lot more data in the article. They talk about moving from a 16 to an 8-week program schedule, and they had to do that primarily because of where they lived in Texas, but it also increased enrollment by about 17%, some other things. But it's a really good article if you have a chance, and that was something that we did in a class, and we were able to analyze it and see, you know, an improvement from semester to semester. Hopefully that helps generate some ideas.
Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, it is important. I believe, again, we might not be able to speak up to each of your potential class intervention, but what we're trying is to share different ideas, and we're hoping that these are gonna aid you in selecting what is that you are planning on doing based on what you have learned from this and the data that you have seen. I'm gonna jump to the next slide now. And the next slide is about aligning your action plan with other institution initiatives. In the online form, you will find this question, and the question is about how are you going to align whatever you are planning on doing with different initiatives in the institution. Why? Well, because this is going to allow you to get more traction, right? So it is important to try to align that. Now, to speak about initiatives, Alex is going to help us because, well, he's the subject matter expert about that. So I'm just going to pass it on to Alex. I already made you co-host, Alex, so you can share your screen.
Well, before I share my screen, just want to say hello to everyone. For those who don't know who I am, my name's Alex Berry. I'm our CTE program manager for San Diego Continuing Education. I work in the Office of Instruction, and I wear a few hats. You'll see me kind of in some budgeting capacity. If you're a Perkins project guru, you'll interact with me some. And then I also help run all of our Strong Workforce initiatives, which is how we're funding this faculty institute. So they asked me today just to come speak to you a little bit about Section 5. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly. Give me 1 second. So this is really just going to be a very, very high level overview of other initiatives going on right now at San Diego Continuing Ed. We are going to share these slides. I'm going to show you a graphic in the middle. We've also shared that graphic with Jesus for the Canvas website. But after we submit all the action plans, we are intending to do a little bit more of a tailored presentation as we get more of a sense on kind of where you all would like to place your interventions and how we can best support them with other initiatives. So I just wanted to start today by briefly speaking to what tools do we have to invest in our students' journey at CE. And we have a lot of them, so this is not all. But we have, for instance, the California Adult Education Program, the Strong Workforce Program, which the goal is more and better career and technical education and pathways into CTE for our ABE and ESL instructors on the call. So that's what's funding this initiative. We have the Carl Perkins Program, another CTE grant initiative. A lot of folks on the call today have been working with Perkins projects for quite some time now. We have our Student Equity and Achievement Program. For our ESL instructors, you may be familiar with the WIOA Title II program. That helps with our integrated and education training plan development and really creating pathways into our CTE programs and onto our credit programs as well. We also recently received guided pathway funding from City College. So they gave us some funds to really look at our program pathways here at CE. And then finally, CalWorks. So you can see we have a full complement of different ways and funding streams that we're able to invest in the student journey. Can everyone see this? The last call, most everyone could, but I can zoom in if I need to. Good. Okay. So the reason why I wanted to show you this graphic today, this is kind of how I conceptualize our investments we're making in the student journey. Oh, looks like we have some chats coming in. One second. Okay. I'm going to pop out of the presentation view real quick. Can you all still see my screen? Yes. Okay. So this is a graphic that I like to reference when giving presentations about how we're investing. Sorry, one more chat. Okay. About how we're investing in the student journey at CE and as a part of the Regional College Consortium, which is the consortium that really oversees some of our strong workforce projects. And so as you can see, this is modeled after the guided pathways approach. In that approach, there are 4 pillars, and then we've added a 5th pillar in this region for employment preparation and transition. But really, as we kind of look at the student's journey, if you can kind of conceptualize how someone comes to us, they're either coming from our high school partners, our adult education partners, and we're unique in that we are an adult education provider as well as a career and technical education provider. So that's unique to us. Or they're self-referred. You know, those are the folks who may be incumbent workers or who are looking to upskill and really retrain themselves for a new career. That's functionally kind of our pre-enrollment strategy. So you think of our marketing department, our outreach department, those are examples of aligned initiatives that would support the pre-enrollment strategies. Then next, the student goes on to onboarding. So think of this as when they're, they're meeting with a counselor. A lot of times they're probably meeting with you all as faculty to get advice on what programs they should enter into or continue on to. And so think of that more as like they're getting the intake. They're maybe getting a differentiated orientation. So we're kind of trying to refer them out to services that'll help them while they're students at continuing education. And then hopefully, and something we're really working on is hopefully they're really thinking about with the end in mind, and we're helping them career plan before they education plan, so they know their ultimate end goal when they complete their educational journey, wherever that may end. Then next, we go really into the ensure learning and stay on the path parts of the guided pathway approach. And so that's where, if you kind of think, that's where the Faculty Institute really resides in student retention and success initiatives. And really the goal here of all of our strategies in this area is to really retain students and get them to the finish line. We also have another project that I'll speak to shortly called work-based learning. So we're really focusing as an institution, you'll hear a lot more about this in the fall, of increasing our work-based learning instances within our classrooms and in support of our classroom experience at San Diego Continuing Education. And then finally, when the students get to the end of their program, they're ready to transition. And so a good example of this type of investment and aligned initiative would be our Career and College Transitions Department. They're tasked with either getting folks to our credit college partners onto 4-year degrees, or more prominently, what they're tasked with doing is helping our students obtain jobs in a field closely related to their studies. So I'm sure many of you have worked with our job placement coordinator and our job developers, but that's another example of an aligned initiative here at Continuing Education that really kind of shows how we are working to invest in the seamless student pathway. So I've thrown a lot at you. I want to hit pause and see if anyone has any questions, and then give you a few examples and let you know about next steps. Okay, I'm going to hop back into the presentation mode. So I wanted to zoom in just very specifically on this component. So really the Faculty Institute is primarily focused on classroom led interventions. And so often what we were thinking when we were developing this presentation is a lot of the aligned initiatives will probably be very closely aligned to the student retention and success component of the guided pathways approach. And so I wanted to give you some examples on the right side of your screen of types of investments we're currently making. So again, we have the Faculty Institute. We've retained 2 faculty work-based learning coordinators, Richard Weinroth and Deborah West. And so we'll be sure to introduce you to them. So think of the example that Jesus displayed about really highlighting the employment components of your everyday in your courses. That would be an example of, if you were to pursue something like that, an aligned initiative could be that not only do you want to do that, but you want to work with the work-based learning coordinators to continue to provide additional instances of work-based learning in your classroom. And then upcoming here shortly, we're anticipating a new investment in 21st century skills development, which would complement our existing instructional strategy at Continuing Ed. So those are some examples of aligned initiatives. What we're going to do next, because there's a lot to choose from, we're going to create a checklist for you as you complete these action plans. And so we'll give you just a 1 or 2 sentence description in the name of the initiative, so you're able to complete section 5 of your action plan. And then once everyone is complete, what we're going to do is offer an opportunity to really get some more tailored information on aligned initiatives for you all to help make connections on behalf of your students. And really, if it makes sense, what we would like to do as well is directly connect you to these initiatives. So for instance, if you could benefit from connecting directly to the work-based learning project, as an example, we want to connect you directly to those faculty members who are leading it. So I think that's all for my presentation today. I'll open the floor to any questions you have, and a checklist will be shortly forthcoming. Okay.
I have a quick question about that. So from the checklist, then we'll be able to kind of align our project to it. So we'll be able to know which one it goes to. Is that the, okay, perfect.
Yeah. And then our hope is to, as we see trends, really provide some opportunities to network.
Awesome. Great. That's so fantastic.
All right. So that would be all the information that Alex is going to provide to you will be very helpful for you to complete question number 5 and regarding the alignment to the initiatives. Thank you, Alex. I'm going to jump to the next one, which is about the potential risks. So there's a question that asks you to identify potential risks that might complicate the execution of your action plans. And it also asks you to provide solutions, like potential solutions for these risks. So the ones that I'm going to show you would apply to both the interventions that I previously mentioned. So let me just throw them so that we can discuss it. How do they sound? So one risk that I see is that the activity, whatever I am planning on doing, my intervention might be more time intensive than what I expected. Maybe I was thinking about sending emails to those students who travel because of the winter break. But what if that's just taking too much of my time? What if I'm not able to do that? So there's just that one possibility. What about when I said that I was going to change the syllabi? What if going back to the syllabi really it's going to really make me spend quite some time trying to fix it or do any change that I might want to do? Or what about the hosting activities to help students make friends or build relationships within the classroom? So I'm going to have to plan that activity. So what if that's going to take a lot of time that I might not have? So what I'm saying here is that in order to prevent that from happening, I'm going to connect with my program chair. And I'm hoping that my program chair is going to help me to identify if maybe I am biting more than what I can chew, right? Maybe this person is going to tell me, okay, Jesus, I have done that before, or your colleague did that like 2 years ago, and this is what happened. So please be aware that this might happen. Are you sure you want to move forward with this? So it's just having that conversation. For me, it's a way to double check that I'm not missing anything, because what could happen is that I'm so excited about my class intervention that I'm just missing something that is important. The other one that I included is impact from COVID and online transition. So it's just a lot of things going on. So at this point in time, I don't feel like I can make these interventions happen because I'm dealing with so many things right now. So I just had to transition to online. And right now I really don't know what's going to happen. I'm not sure if I'm going to stay like this or if I'm going to go back to the campus. So there's just so many things in the air. So because of that, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to wait until spring 2021 to start implementing my action plan. So that's the way in which I'm going to minimize the risk. And also some people in the other group mentioned, well, you might even have to go a little further than that and also say that you will wait until spring 2020 to assess when is the best time to put the intervention into action, because we still don't know what's going to happen. So that's just another risk. And the third risk that I have is not necessarily a risk, it's more of a challenge, and it is something that we call the internal validity. And this is something that Tammy mentioned. If you think this from a research perspective, it seems like in an ideal world, what we would be doing is kind of like you look at the data like before the intervention, how things were, and then you apply your intervention, and then you look how things look. So you do like this pre-post analysis, but from a research perspective, you need to control a lot of variables in there. So that's hard. It's not really simple. But if you add to that mix the fact that we are transitioning and there's this COVID and then there's a lot of things going on, well, that can cause that things that I believe I changed were not changed because of me. What I'm trying to say is that I might apply one intervention and I might believe that it was my intervention what improved my numbers, but maybe that is not really the case. Maybe it was just something else. I remember, Tammy, you mentioned, what if my students are in my classroom not because things are better, just because they are locked up right now, they cannot go anywhere else. So maybe it's just that. Maybe it's not that I'm doing this or that. So honestly, I cannot provide you a way to work around this, but the region is aware of that. And that is why I was telling you that once we go back and try to analyze what we did, we are not gonna try to take some approach of pre-post research, control group, not control group. No, we're not gonna do it in that way. It's gonna be more of a discussion. Hey, so this is my anecdotal evidence. This is what I believe it worked. These are my numbers, but be aware that all these different things happen. So it's just having that discussion. So regarding that particular thing, I want you to feel, we don't want everyone to be like stressed about that. We are aware that that is a potential problem. So what we want people to take from here is more of a learning experience. Like, oh yeah, I applied that and it seemed like this worked and that didn't work. But if at the end of the day, when I look at the numbers, the numbers are not making sense, or I'm not able to compare A versus B, that's part of what's going on right now. Cassandra, before I jump to the next slide, I want to make sure, do you want to add something into that, or can I jump to the next one?
No, I'm good. The only thing I would maybe add is that I think we're going to be in an online situation longer than even we think. I am not quite sure how much longer this is going to be. So I know even for my classes, there's a lot of classes at this point that I'm looking at that will always be either online or hybrid at this point. So just be thinking about that as you go through this. And in terms of, if you're looking for an online solution because you do think you'll be online for the next year or two, just be mindful of that, versus if you think you'd be coming back to campus 100%. That's all.
Thank you. Okay, before I jump to the next slide, I'm wondering, any questions, any comments on this? Any additional risk that you foresee at this point? All right, it feels like we're good then. The last question that you're gonna find in your online form is about the sustainability plan. And the sustainability plan is just explaining how are you anticipating to use these results? How do you anticipate to move from there? So say that I apply my intervention and then I find out that it works, or the opposite, it doesn't work. What am I going to do? So it's just talking about that. And it is also talking about how are you planning to sustain the intervention. And this is key because I know it, I believe this happens with faculty more than any other people. You are very passionate people. So this is where it gets a little tricky because you love your students and you want to make them, you want to do a lot of things for them. But sometimes what happens is that in the long term, you might not have all the resources needed to continue making the intervention to happen. So just going back to the example about sending the emails to students, maybe I think that is the best idea in the world. But again, I need to think, okay, but in the long run, do I feel like I can keep doing that? Like, do I really have the time to do that? So that is another thing that is important for you to think about, like if you can really sustain this throughout the time. So after that, once you finally complete that question, the system is gonna ask you, are you sure that you wanna submit your online form? So, just make sure that you have everything, all the things that you should have, because after that, you would have submitted your online form, and that's where we're gonna get in to review it and come back to you with feedback. So that's pretty much all the content that we had for today. I wanna open the room for questions, any comments, feel free to, to ask them. And if you feel like you got all what you needed from this session, unless Cassandra has anything else to add, I think we're good to go.
I just want everyone to take a collective breath, because I know that this has been a lot on top of everything else, but I think it's been so much fun to work with everybody from different departments and to look at the data. And so I'm really excited to work with you guys on the action plans themselves, and to see what you guys come up with. But really, it's been a cool process. So, and I know it's been a lot on top of everything else. But I think for the students, it's really going to pay off. So that's what we're going with, right? Okay. That's all I have to say.